Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. My name is Lisa Rodriguez Watson. I'm one of the pastors here at Christ City. Before I get going, I would like to release the teens to Teen City. So if you are a teenager, not in your heart, because some of us are teenagers in our heart. If you're an actual teenager, you can head out with Nikki for Teen City this morning. All right. It's the Burr months. You know what that means here at Christ City Church? It means that it's burr outside and really nice and warm in here. So if you're new here, I just want you to know you're going to dress for the outdoors and have like an extra layer, and then you're going to come in here and you're going to want a t-shirt. It's actually rather comfortable today, but for future reference, that may be something for you to consider. If you were with us, either in person or on YouTube, last week we started a new series on peacemaking. It's called Blessed Are the Peacemakers. We could never have known a year ago, and Matthew explained this, we could never have known a year ago when we put this series together, the state of the world and the amounts of conflict that there are right now. But it seems like providentially God had this series for this time for our community, and we're grateful for that. Before we get in too deep, I just want to do a quick poll of the congregation, okay? So don't worry, all my introvert friends, you don't have to talk to anybody. The poll is this. I want to know which of you in the room are middle children? Show of hands. Middle kids? Okay, great. Me too. I'm a middle child. My older sister is 11 months, count it, think about it, 11 months older than me. My younger sister is 16 months younger than me. We're pretty close, little family. I'm a classic middle child by all the psychological birth order study findings in the very scientific journal of parents.com. These are the common characteristics of middle children. People pleasers, somewhat rebellious, true, thrives on friendships, has a large social circle, peacemaker. And because all preachers love internet research, here's what HuffPost had to say about middle children. If you are a middle child, you are probably understanding, cooperative, and flexible, yet competitive. Also true. You are concerned with fairness. In fact, as a middle child, you are likely to pick an intimate circle of friends to represent your extended family. It is here that you will find the attention that you likely are lacking from your family of origin. As a middle child, you receive the least amount of attention from family, and as a result, this family that is chosen is your compensation. Though often a late bloomer, a little intrusive, you find yourself in power careers that allow you to use your negotiating skills and get that all too needed attention. Anyone feeling a little exposed in here, middle children friends? Can you relate? Middle children, can you relate? Yeah. People who love middle children, do you see this in the people that you love? Yeah, okay. Well, most of the traits of middle children are true of me. The one that I have most commonly been known as in my family of origin is the peacemaker. I always was, and still mostly am, easy to get along with. In my family of origin, I brokered peace within the family, between my sisters most often, sometimes between my parents and my siblings. To this day, some folks might tell you that one of my greatest superpowers is holding space and people together. That's a quality that I'm really proud of. But when that harmonious environment and peace gets threatened, as you might imagine, I feel a little uneasy. In this struggle, my fix-it instincts will like kick into high gear because I just want everything to be okay with all the people, and I want to restore that harmonious peace. So what can happen there is that I struggle um, with running the risk of short-circuiting real peace for a quick fix counterfeit to peace, which is essentially the lack of conflict. That's not real peace. True peacemaking doesn't always fix quickly or easily, and some things take a very long time, maybe several lifetimes, to hold and come together again, for shalom and for flourishing to really be present. So what are we to do in the midst of the turmoil that exists in our world? How are we called to be peacemakers? Last week, Matthew helped us understand that the meaning of the word peacemaker, as it's used in Matthew 5:9, our centering passage, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. There's that word peacemaker is two words. It's a compound word. Irene, which is the Greek word for peace, and poeo, which means to make peace. But it also means to bring forth peace. It means to work for peace, to keep in, as in to hold something fast. And his favorite, if you were here last week, it means to deal in peace. We deal in peace. We actively deal in the currency of peace as kingdom peacemakers. Conceptually, we get that, right? But what does it mean to make peace? What are the things that make for peace? This is what we're going to explore this morning, and I will offer three things. They are short, they are brief, they are by no means exhaustive, because who could possibly, and you all want to go home and have lunch at some point. So they're just three things that I feel like are faithful for our community this morning to understand. And I want to offer a resource for you. There's this book that I came across, written by my friend Josh Buck. It's called Everyday Activism: Following 7 Practices of Jesus to Create a Just World. So the word activism is very, very alike to and akin to peacemaking. And some of the high-level concepts that I've used in today's sermon actually were taken from this book. So I commend it to you. So the first thing that makes for peace is forgiveness. Probably feels like a no-brainer. But it may not be our first instinct when we're in the presence of challenging conflict. If we're going to be peacemakers, we have to deal in the currency of forgiveness rather than the cultural trend towards resentment and hostility and the kinds of things that we see in cancel culture. And let me tell you, I got to preach this to myself, okay? Because the truth of it is when I'm offended, when I am hurt, when I am in the midst of conflict, the things that I feel most entitled to are resentment and hostility. I feel like I deserve to get to be as mad as I want for as long as I want. It doesn't matter who it hurts along the way. And I feel entitled to that. Now, let me be clear. That initial feeling is not a bad feeling. I feel like that's pretty normal. What we have to be careful about, though, is allowing that to take root in our lives. So how do I deal with my initial tendency towards hostility and resentment when I'm experiencing pain and grief because of violence or injustice in the city or in my family or in the workplace or in the world? What do? I go to Jesus. We've been singing about it all morning. Ephesians 2:14 says, He himself is our peace. When I teeter on the brink of bitterness and resentment, or maybe I've just gone headlong and given myself over to it, there is no peace to be found. I go to Jesus because he is my peace. And let me be real honest. I grew up in the church. I am very familiar with empty Sunday school Jesus answers that are nothing more than Christian platitudes. I know that business. That's not what I'm talking about. When I go to him, I tell him all about it. He gathers up all of my sorrow, all of my fury, all of my confusion, and he holds it with me. And he tells me I'm not alone. I'm comforted by Jesus and his presence with me, and I experience some peace, even in the midst of things not actually being fixed yet. My capacity for peacemaking will be limited if I cling to resentment and hostility. Releasing that resentment to Jesus first helps me move forward towards forgiveness and peacemaking, because I'm more settled, because I'm more grounded in the person of peace. Another practice that's crucial for us as peacemakers is to go to Jesus regularly and to do the work, the inner work of releasing our own guilt and shame. For the ways that we've been complicit in harm, for the ways that we have lived and thought and acted against the ways of Jesus that are full of love and peace and justice. Embracing this humble posture with God that is grounded in love and grace and courage and truth-telling helps us practice what is needed for peacemaking. This is where we get the practice, is in the presence of God. And we get to receive love and forgiveness from God. Doing our own peacemaking with God enables us to more wholeheartedly extend that to others in the midst of conflict, in the midst of strife. So we practice it first with Jesus by coming and releasing our own shame and our own guilt. It sounds simple, and to some extent it is. But we would be really mistaken to think that peace is simple. We know this, right? The idea of peace is simple. And gosh, we love the thought of peace. You know, it's like that common answer. Hey, what's your one wish for the world? Oh, world peace. Yeah. The idea is simple. And we love it. But real peacemaking is much more complex. A few years ago, I was challenged by a lifelong peacemaker. Her name is Mary Nelson. She's one of the founders of an organization I used to work for called the Christian Community Development Association. Mary lived on the west side of Chicago for 26 years, just a phenomenal woman. And we were in conversation one day in the midst of a very challenging, very conflict-laden and controversial time for our organization. And in our conversation, she said, yeah, we all want peace, but we don't want to walk the difficult and sacrificial path to peace. Whew. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that. She was right. We want the liberation and we want the harmony that comes as a result of peace, but the costly path to peace, yeah, we don't really want that. It's costly. And we only have to look to the scriptures, as far as the scriptures, to know this. Our passage for today, it says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations." His purpose, if you've ever wondered, what was Jesus' purpose? It says it right here. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile them both to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. Peace is costly. It cost Jesus. The way that Jesus eliminated hostilities between the two contentious people groups of his day, the Jews and the Gentiles, was by his death on the cross. This was also how he made peace between humanity and God. The path to peace is very unlikely to cost us our lives. It's very unlikely, like it cost Jesus his life, but it almost certainly is going to be costly. we can experience and extend forgiveness because Jesus already forged that path. But it was costly, to the point of death for him. I haven't always had a mature understanding of forgiveness and the costly nature of forgiveness. This was really clear to me years ago when I was doing humanitarian aid in Albania. So peacemaking on a larger scale is really what this was, and how hard forgiveness is in the midst of that. I spent the summer in Albania during the Kosovo and Serbia crisis, working with Kosovar refugees who had fled ethnic cleansing in their country. The conflict was between majority Muslim ethnic Albanians, who were the Kosovars, and majority Christian Orthodox Serbians. Several days a week, I worked in this really small warehouse with my teammates who were Kosovar refugees, and together we distributed foam mattresses, diapers, clothing, canned foods, just the things that would help people kind of make it by. Out of this one really small warehouse, it felt more like an oversized garage, cement floors, cement walls, the roll down top door. If you've traveled to developing countries, you might have an imagination for what this looked like. We worked in close quarters under pretty stressful circumstances as we navigated the desperation of families and individuals who had made a long and harrowing journey from their homes in Kosovo to the capital city of Tirana in Albania, where they basically had to figure out where to live, how to survive, and how to begin again until they were able to go back home. As is often the case, friendships forged in the crucible of challenge develop pretty quickly and pretty deeply. One of my teammates, Amar, who led our distribution work in the warehouse, was a helpful cultural guide as I was navigating a bunch of dynamics that were unfamiliar to me. We talked about the crisis, the gassing of children while they were in school, dangerous escapes in the night to flee the enemy, along with just the normal things, family, culture, food, friends, all the things that new friends talk about. One nagging and relatively naive question that kept coming up for me was, what would it look like for the Serbians and the Kosovars to forgive each other? Like, couldn't it just be that easy? What would it look like? As we talked one day about the deep hostility between the groups, I summoned the courage to ask this question, and Amar's face told me what I needed to know before he ever said a word. It wasn't exactly disbelief, but it was more like I didn't know what I was asking. He then told me that forgiveness wasn't possible because of generations of conflict that had dated back to the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't individual forgiveness that was needed. It was repair from decades, if not centuries, of hate and harm and death that was perpetrated from both sides. That's not a conversation and a hug, and then everything is all better. I wanted peace for my newfound friends. And my question, it wasn't a bad one, because forgiveness is a crucial part of peacemaking. However, the path to peace would be a very long one, and it would feel costly to both the Serbians and the Kosovars, as they each would have to relinquish things that they felt entitled to. And for my friend Amar, it felt impossible. Extending and receiving forgiveness is part of what makes for peace. But when things are complex and they're rooted, it's not easy work, and it feels incredibly costly. Still, I want us to consider the alternative. Bitterness, resentment, hostility, those things are antithetical to the ways of Jesus. And they keep us captive to the offending person or conflict or situation or people. Forgiveness, which is the way of Jesus, offers us liberation from that hostility and resentment. And it is one of the things that makes for peace. Another thing that makes for peace is not something so much that we do, but it is something that we don't do. And it's what we can give ourselves permission to not do. Let me say it like that. And that thing is rest. Rest makes for peace. It's a form of resistance to the demands that a nonstop news cycle, a constantly on, always reachable, hyper-connected, market-driven, better, faster, stronger culture places on us. Life in this day and age, it can feel like just chaos management. Add to that the complexities of war and of violence, of family strife, of leadership abuse, of toxic workplaces, large and small scale injustices and oppression, and on and on. Resting, rather than continuing with the grind, gives us space to engage with our humanity, our limitations. It reminds us that we are not God, that we have limits where God does not have limits. Our work of peacemaking begins from rest rather than being the reward for work well done. Resting is our way of trusting that the burdens of the world were already taken on by Jesus in the work of the cross. And we're invited into co-creating peace and renewal with God from the place of God's divine command to rest, not in seeking reward for doing a good job with peacemaking. Having scheduled times of rest like Sabbath, getting a good night's rest, taking even brief retreats of solitude and silence are all good. So I want to offer those as practices. Another thing that's really important for us to do as we consider how to make peace through rest is to pay attention to our emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. Setting personal boundaries is good. Seeing a counselor, a mental health professional is good. Processing our grief and our joy in the midst of trusted relationships is good. These are the things that help us rest from the grind. And we have to slow down enough to know when we need them. We have to attune to ourselves so that we know when to disconnect. It can be too much. We can get overwhelmed, and that is not the responsibility of the Christian peacemaker. We will and we do carry stress in our bodies from the work of peacemaking. So let me ask you this. Are you attentive to your emotional and physical needs throughout the day? If not, who can help you with this? If so, who might you know that you can help so that they can listen better to their bodies and to their emotions? Rest gives us space to process the stress that we internalize as Christian peacemakers. And it is from that place that we can harness new energy and creativity for continuing in the work of making peace. So we have it sort of on the day-to-day or sort of periodically, but it is the thing that actually allows us to do this for the long haul. We have to attend to our souls and our emotions and our bodies because we are saturated with so much to do and to solve and to repair and to make right. And the truth is, and we know this by experience, that we can't engage on all fronts equally all the time. And Jesus invites us to rest. Matthew 11:28 may be a really familiar passage to us. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Peacemaking is hard and wearying work, but it can be sustainable when we rest. Rest is the key to lifelong peacemaking, and it's a path to peace as we trust the one who is peace to do what we cannot do in the midst of all of our limitations. It's important that we give ourselves grace in the work of peacemaking. It's critical that we determine what we will and what we won't engage. And that can be everything from large societal issues, can't engage on all of them, to the smallest of things. What's going on in your family, what you'll address with your housemates or your spouse or your siblings or your children. Not everything needs attention every time. Here's a small illustration. Back when we lived in Memphis, the church we were planting met in the evening. Our kids were very young. We'd go to church in the morning at the main campus out in the suburbs, and then we'd kind of relax or do whatever in the afternoon. And in the evening, we would head over to the congregation that was closer to our neighborhood. As a young boy, Elias, our middle son, he loved superheroes. So he had Batman, Spider-Man, Superman toys, superhero cars, superhero costumes, superhero cups, superhero plates. You know the thing, right? It's like everything superhero. Well, superheroes weren't the only thing that he liked. He also liked dinosaurs. So we had dinosaur figurines, dinosaur reading books, dinosaur coloring books, dinosaur puzzles, dinosaur costumes. And he had this one very bright green plushie T-Rex costume that came up to his waist. It had straps that went over his shoulders to hold the costume up. And then there were also little straps that he could hold because the head was like out here, and he could turn the T-Rex head back and forth with his straps. So he and Nate, his older brother, were playing one afternoon in a beautiful combination of the T-Rex and superhero land that they enjoyed. And it gets close to time for church. And Elias refused to take off his costume. Let me pause for just a minute here. I come from a very religious family. And in my religious family, especially the Cuban side of the family, we as young girls, my sisters and I, would go to church with dresses every Sunday con mangas, with sleeves. Because uno no puede show your arm, you can't show your arm in the service. You know what I'm saying? Beautiful shoes, nice dress. This was how you go to church. As a teenager and a young adult, I also had a decent amount of conflict with my parents because I was fine. I was really fine to go to church in my jeans with holes in my t-shirt. However, that was not acceptable in my very religious church-going family. That's my upbringing. Now, sometimes we don't always undo all the things from our upbringing. And so on this particular day, when Elias was in his costume, T-Rex, little T-Rex Elias, it had already been a stressful day. Okay, so I'm pregnant. I have 2 young boys. We've already gone to church once. There is a decent amount of peacemaking and conflict resolution and redirecting and correction that happens on a normal day in a family of young children. I was tired. And I still had this sort of like, children don't wear costumes to church. And I had to make a choice. I had to decide, am I going to fight this battle with Elias and make him take off his costume? Or am I just going to be like, it's one Sunday, it's a costume, it's going to be okay. I let him wear his costume. And I think I have a photo of it. Yeah. I let him wear his costume. There he is, resting, happy as his little dinosaur self with his head on my lap while we're in service. My drive for having things right according to my upbringing and training my children well had to take the back seat that day. Rest prevailed, and it made for an evening of peace. We can't bring equal energy to all the things all the time. There is no peace and well-being for us in that. And rest, hear me, rest is resistance to the impossible demands of a world that's bent on chaos and violence. So rest is another thing that makes for peace. I'm going to move quickly because I'm noticing we're almost at the top of the hour. The final thing is love. Love is both the foundation of peace and a path to it. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is asked by an expert in the law, what is the greatest commandment? In other words, what's the most important thing? Jesus, if you had to boil it all the way down, what's the most important thing? And the first thing out of Jesus' mouth was love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second command is like it. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. I wonder if you noticed the verses that the parents up here were had selected for their children were both about love. It's the foundation for our faith. Peace with God and peace with humanity begins with love. Loving God and loving our neighbors. So another important question that Jesus got asked by another expert in the law was, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? He answered that question with a question, but before he asked the question, he told a story. And it's a familiar story. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. What can often be missed in the telling of that story is that Jesus was upending the concept of neighbor. He was tying neighbor to enemy. The Samaritans were enemies of the Jews. And Jesus used his story to stretch the man's concept of neighbor. It wasn't someone who was like the expert in the law. It wasn't someone who lived close, who shared language and culture and food and space. Jesus' definition of neighbor was of one that should be loved as we love ourselves, and is a person who is considered an enemy and an outsider to our ways of life. Matthew 5:9 says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Just 34 verses later, in that same chapter, Jesus is crystal clear about not just neighbor love, but also enemy love. He says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. As children of God, we are to love not just God who loved us first, not just our neighbors who are like us and who like us, but we are to love our enemies who are unlike us and may even threaten our ways of life. Love is the pathway to peace, and it's the foundation from which we build peace. Ephesians 2 tells us that Christ is our peace, that he did away with hostility. As peacemakers, we have a forerunner. Jesus is the one who made peace first. Jesus forgave first. Jesus rested first. He is our forerunner as peacemakers. He is also our path to peace. When we trust him to help us forgive, he helps us forgive. And we experience liberation from resentment and hostility. When we trust him to help us rest, really rest, not distraction rest, but really rest, he helps us rest and shows us what liberation is from the tyranny and exhaustion of life. When we trust him to help us love, he helps us love like he does. And these are the things that make for peace. Will you pray with me?